What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved actors walks onto a daytime talk show and everything goes completely off the rails? When Danny DeVito sat down on The View, nobody expected the conversation to explode the way it did. This wasn't your typical celebrity interview. This was a full-blown confrontation that had the audience gasping, the other hosts scrambling, and social media absolutely losing its mind. Before we get into exactly what went down, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me whose side you're on in this whole situation. Trust me, you're going to have opinions. So Danny DeVito walks onto the View set and the energy is already interesting. He's got that signature Danny charm, waving to the audience, smiling, and you can tell he's in a good mood. The hosts are doing their usual welcome. Whoopi's cracking jokes and everything seems normal. Joy Behar is sitting there with that look she always has, like she's already got her questions locked and loaded. Danny sits down. They do the pleasantries, talk about his latest project for maybe 2 minutes. And then Joy pivots. She pivots hard. Joy leans forward and says, "So Danny, you've been in Hollywood for decades. You've seen it all. What do you think about the state of comedy today? Seems like nobody can take a joke anymore." Now Danny's nodding along and he starts talking about how comedy has always evolved, how every generation thinks the next one is too sensitive, and he's being diplomatic about it. He's talking about how context matters, how intent matters, and you can see Joy's face starting to shift. She's not getting the answer she wants. She interrupts him mid-sentence and goes, "But don't you think it's gone too far? I mean, we used to be able to say anything and people would laugh. Now everyone's offended by everything." Danny stops, looks at her, and you can see this little change in his expression. He goes, "Well, Joy, I think there's a difference between pushing boundaries and just being mean. Comedy should punch up, not down. That's always been the rule." The audience claps, but Joy is already shaking her head. She goes, "Oh, come on, Danny. Punch up, punch down, it's all just jokes. When did we become so serious about comedy?" And Danny, he's still calm at this point. He says it's not about being serious, it's about being aware. You can be funny without hurting people who are already struggling. That's not censorship, that's just not being a jerk. Joy laughs, but it's that defensive laugh. And she says, "So you're saying comedians from our era were jerks? Is that what you're saying?" Danny shakes his head and goes, "I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying times change and we should change with them." Joy fires back immediately. "Why should we change? Why can't people just develop thicker skin now?" The other hosts are starting to look uncomfortable. Whoopi tries to jump in with a comment about nuance, but Joy is on a roll. She looks at Danny and says, "You know what I think? I think people use this sensitivity thing as an excuse. They don't want to hear anything that challenges them." Danny's jaw tightens just a little bit and he says, "Or maybe people are tired of being the punchline when they're already dealing with enough in their lives." Joy throws her hands up and goes, "Oh, here we go with the victim mentality. Everyone's a victim now. Danny, you're an actor. You've played characters that were offensive. You've done edgy material. Don't act like you're above it all." And this is where you can see Dai's demeanor really start to shift. He sits up straighter and says, "I've played characters." Joy, characters? There's a difference between playing a role and using your platform to mock people who can't fight back. Joy snaps back. "Who's mocking anyone?" "I'm talking about comedy, about freedom of speech. You remember freedom of speech, don't you, Danny?" The audience is dead quiet now. You could hear a pin drop. Danny looks directly at her and says, "Freedom of speech doesn't mean freedom from consequences. You can say whatever you want, but people also have the freedom to tell you it's not okay." Joy's face is getting red and she says, "So now we're policing speech. That's what we're doing." Danny responds, "No, Joy. We're asking people to think before they speak." "There's a difference." Joy lets out this exasperated sigh and goes, "I've been thinking before I speak my entire career. I don't need a lecture from someone who made a career playing a guy who throws people out of windows." The audience gasps. Dai's eyes widen and he says, "Are you seriously using my roles against me right now? That's your argument?" Joy doubles down and says, "I'm just saying maybe you're not the moral authority here." Danny leans back and says, "I never claimed to be a moral authority, but I know the difference between right and wrong, and I know when someone's defending cruelty by calling it comedy." The tension is absolutely electric at this point. Joy's face is flushed and she shoots back, "Cruelty? I'm talking about jokes, Danny. Jokes. You know what those are, right? The things that used to make people laugh before everyone became so fragile." Danny shakes his head slowly and says, "You keep saying fragile like it's a bad thing. Maybe being aware of other people's feelings isn't weakness. Maybe it's just being a decent human being." Joy laughs, but there's no humor in it. She says, decent human being. Okay, so anyone who disagrees with you is indecent. That's really the road you want to go down. Dai's voice gets firmer and he says, I didn't say that, you're twisting my words. All I'm saying is that comedy evolves, and if you can't evolve with it, maybe you're the one with the problem, not everyone else. The other hosts are exchanging looks. Sarah Haynes tries to interject with something about finding middle ground, but Joy cuts her off. She points at Danny and says, you know what your problem is? You've gone Hollywood soft. You've let all these young people convince you that everything is offensive. Back in the day, you would have laughed at this stuff. Dai's voice rises just slightly enough that you know he's getting genuinely upset. He says, back in the day, I also didn't know better. Back in the day, we did a lot of things that were wrong. That doesn't mean we keep doing them. Growth is a good thing, Joy. You should try it sometime. The audience erupts with a mix of gasps and some applause. Joy's mouth drops open and she says, did you just tell me I need to grow? Are you kidding me right now? Danny doesn't back down. He says, I'm saying that holding on to outdated ideas about what's acceptable isn't something to be proud of. It's stubbornness. Joy stands up from her chair. Actually stands up. She says, I am not going to sit here and be lectured by someone who thinks he's suddenly enlightened because he reads Twitter. Danny stands up too and says, this has nothing to do with Twitter, Joy. This is about basic respect, something you're clearly struggling with right now. Whoopi finally manages to get a word in and says, okay, let's all take a breath here, but Joy's not having it. She looks at Danny and says, you come on my show and insult me. Danny fires back, your show. I thought this was The View, not the Joy Behar Hour. And if you feel insulted by being asked to consider other people's perspectives, that says more about you than it does about me. Joy's voice is shaking now. She says, I have considered other people's perspectives my entire career. I've fought for people's rights. I've stood up for causes when it wasn't popular. Don't you dare question my character. Danny responds, I'm not questioning your character, Joy. I'm questioning your inability to understand that the world has moved forward and you seem determined to stay stuck in place. She throws her hands up and says, stuck in place? I'm stuck in place. You're the one who keeps playing the same types of characters over and over. At least I'm willing to have controversial conversations. Dai's jaw clenches and he says, there's a difference between having controversial conversations and just being contrarian for the sake of it. You're not brave for doubling down on outdated attitudes. You're just stubborn. Joy's voice goes up an octave. She says, outdated attitudes? My attitudes have been consistent for 40 years. I believe in free speech. I believe in comedy. I believe people need to toughen up. If that makes me outdated, then fine, I'm outdated. But at least I'm not a hypocrite who pretends to be progressive while making millions off of Hollywood. Danny takes a step closer and says, making money in Hollywood has nothing to do with whether or not I can recognize when something's wrong. And calling people soft because they don't want to be disrespected isn't the defense you think it is. Joy shoots back. I'm not calling people soft for not wanting to be disrespected. I'm calling them soft for thinking every joke is an attack. He responds immediately. And I'm saying that maybe if you keep having to defend your jokes by saying people are too sensitive. Your jokes aren't as good as you think they are. Joy looks like she's about to explode. She says, my jokes are fine, Danny. The problem is people like you who have decided that being offended is a personality trait. Danny's voice gets quieter but more intense. He says, nobody's making being offended a personality trait. Joy, people are just asking to be treated with dignity. Why is that so hard for you to understand? Joy snaps. I understand dignity, Danny. What I don't understand is why we have to walk on eggshells around everyone all the time. He leans forward and says, it's not walking on eggshells, Joy. It's called consideration. It's called empathy. It's called thinking about how your words affect people. Joy's voice is sharp as a knife now. She says, I think about how my words affect people every single day. But I also think that people need to take responsibility for their own reactions instead of blaming everyone else for their feelings. Danny throws his arms up and says, so it's everyone else's fault when you say something hurtful. That's really your take. Joy yells back. I didn't say it's their fault. I said they have agency over how they respond. There's a difference. Danny yells over her. No, Joy. There isn't a difference when you're using that logic to avoid accountability for what comes out of your mouth. The studio is in complete chaos now. The audience doesn't know whether to clap or stay silent. Whoopi is trying to restore order, but her voice is getting drowned out. Joy points at Danny and says, you want to talk about accountability? Let's talk about accountability. You've been in this business for 50 years. You've told offensive jokes. You've been part of projects that pushed boundaries. And now suddenly you're the voice of reason. Where was this energy 20 years ago, Danny? Danny's face is red now. And he says, 20 years ago, I was learning joy. I was growing. I was listening to people who told me when I got it wrong. That's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to evolve. But you're standing here acting like evolution is a bad thing. Joy shouts, I'm not against evolution. I'm against self-righteousness. And right now, you're being incredibly self-righteous. He shouts back. Calling someone self-righteous because they're asking you to be more thoughtful is just another way of avoiding the conversation. Joy's hands are shaking and she says, I'm not avoiding anything. I've had this conversation 1,000 times. I'm tired of being told that my opinions are wrong, just because they don't align with whatever the current trend is. Danny steps even closer and says, this isn't a trend, Joy, this is progress. And the fact that you keep calling it a trend shows exactly how disconnected you are. Joy's voice cracks slightly and she says, disconnected. I talk to people every single day. I know what's going on in the world. Just because I don't agree with everything doesn't mean I'm disconnected. He responds, but you're not just disagreeing, Joy, you're dismissing. There's a huge difference. You're dismissing people's genuine pain and concern by calling them soft and overly sensitive. That's not having a different opinion, that's being dismissive. Joy throws her note cards down on the table and says, fine, you want me to validate everyone's feelings. Is that what you want? Everyone gets a trophy. Everyone's feelings matter. No one can ever be challenged. Danny's voice booms across the studio. He says, that's not what I said and you know. Stop creating straw man arguments. I'm talking about basic human decency, and you keep turning it into this absurd extreme position that nobody is actually advocating for. Joy yells back, it's not a straw man, Danny. It's where this road leads. If we keep coddling everyone, if we keep telling people they never have to hear anything uncomfortable, we create a society of weak people who can't handle reality. Danny looks at her with genuine disbelief and says, or maybe we create a society where people don't have to constantly defend their right to exist without being mocked. Did you ever think of that? Joy's eyes are blazing and she says, nobody's mocking anyone's right to exist. That's such a dramatic exaggeration. We're talking about jokes, Danny, jokes. He leans on the table between them and says, to you they're just jokes, Joy. To the people those jokes are about, they're reminders that society sees them as less than. They're reminders that their pain is entertainment. How is that so hard to understand? Joy leans forward too, now they're face to face. And she says, because not everything is that deep, Danny. Sometimes a joke is just a joke. Sometimes people laugh and move on. Not everything is a political statement. Di's voice drops low and intense. He says, when you have privilege, Joy, you get to decide that things aren't that deep. When you're the one being laughed at, you don't get that luxury. Joy straightens up and says, oh, here we go with the privilege lecture. You're a wealthy white man in Hollywood, Danny. Don't talk to me about privilege. His eyes widen and he says, I never said I don't have privilege, Joy. I'm saying I'm aware of it and I try to use it responsibly. What are you doing with yours besides punching down at people who have less power than you? The audience gasps again. Some people are cheering. Others look shocked. Joy's face goes pale and then immediately red. She says quietly but with venom, I have spent my entire career speaking truth to power. I have gone after politicians, corporations, systems of oppression. Don't you dare accuse me of punching down. Danny doesn't back off. He says, speaking truth to power is great, Joy, but that doesn't give you a free pass to mock marginalized communities and call it comedy. Joy's voice rises again. She says, I don't mock marginalized communities. I make jokes about everyone equally. That's the whole point. Equal opportunity offense. Danny shakes his head vigorously and says, equal opportunity offense doesn't exist when we don't all start from equal positions. Making fun of a billionaire CEO is not the same as making fun of a struggling single mother. Context matters. Joy slams her hand on the table and says, I know context matters, Danny. Stop acting like I'm some ignorant person who doesn't understand nuance. I understand it perfectly fine. I just don't think we need to sanitize everything to protect everyone's feelings all the time. Danny slams his hand down too and says, nobody's asking you to sanitize everything. We're asking you to think about impact. That's it, just think about impact. She fires back, I do think about impact. And you know what? Sometimes the impact is that people need to hear things that make them uncomfortable. Sometimes that's exactly what they need. Danny's face is incredulous and he says, who made you the judge of what people need to hear? Who gave you that authority? Joy's voice shakes and she says, the same people who gave you the authority to come on here and lecture me about how I should think and speak. We both have platforms, Danny. We both use them. Don't act like you're morally superior. Danny points at her and says, I'm not acting morally superior. I'm just not defending cruelty by calling it comedy. Joy's entire body is tense and she practically screams, it's not cruelty. Stop calling it cruelty. It's comedy. It's satire. It's commentary. Why can't you see the difference? Danny screams back. Because there isn't always a difference, Joy. Sometimes cruelty disguises itself as comedy, and we have to be smart enough to recognize it. Joy looks around at the other hosts desperately and says, is anyone else hearing this? Am I crazy here? Sunny host carefully says, I think you both have valid points, but maybe we can lower our voices. Joy snaps at her. I don't want to lower my voice, Sunny. I'm tired of being told to calm down when I'm passionate about something. Danny jumps on that immediately and says, oh, so now you're the victim. Now you're the one being silenced. That's rich, Joy. That's really rich. Joy whips back around to face him and says, I never said I was a victim. I said I'm tired of being tone policed when I'm trying to have a real conversation. Danny laughs bitterly and says, tone policed? You've been yelling at me for 10 minutes about how everyone else is too sensitive, and now you're complaining about being tone policed. Joy's voice breaks slightly, and she says, you're twisting everything I say, every single thing. I'm trying to make a point about freedom and comedy, and you keep making it about me being a bad person. Dai's voice softens just a fraction, and he says, I never said you were a bad person, Joy. I said you're defending bad positions. There's a difference. She wipes at her eyes quickly and says, defending bad positions? These are my principles, Danny. These are things I've believed my entire life, and you're standing here telling me they're all wrong. How would you feel if someone did that to you? Danny takes a breath and says, if someone showed me that my principles were hurting people, I'd hope I'd have the courage to examine them and change. Joy's voice is raw now. She says, so that's it. Just abandon everything you believe because someone tells you it's hurtful. Where does it end, Danny? When do we get to stand for something? Danny responds firmly. You can stand for things, Joy, but maybe stand for kindness instead of defending your right to hurt people without consequences. Joy shakes her head repeatedly and says, I'm not trying to hurt anyone. That's never been my intention. Why won't you believe that? Danny says, I believe that's not your intention, but intention doesn't erase impact. You can hurt people without meaning to, and you still have to take responsibility for it. She looks defeated for a moment and then rallies. She says, so every time someone says they're hurt by something, I say, I just have to apologize and change, even if I think they're overreacting, even if I think the hurt isn't warranted. Danny nods and says, yes, Joy, because their pain is real to them, even if you don't understand it. That's what empathy is. Joy's voice is barely above a whisper now, but still sharp. She says, I have empathy, Danny. I have so much empathy, but I also have standards. I also have beliefs about what comedy is and what free speech means. Danny says gently but firmly, and those beliefs are hurting people. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Joy looks at him with tears in her eyes and says, so, I'm just supposed to become someone I'm not. I'm supposed to pretend I agree with things I don't agree with. Danny shakes his head and says, nobody's asking you to pretend anything. We're asking you to listen, to learn, to consider that maybe you don't have all the answers. She laughs through the tears and says, none of us have all the answers, Danny. But I've been doing this a long time and I trust my judgment, Danny says quietly. And that's exactly the problem, Joy. You trust your judgment so much that you won't consider you might be wrong. Joy wipes her face and her voice gets stronger again. She says, I consider that I might be wrong every single day. But when I look at the evidence, when I look at what's happening in the world, I still come to the same conclusions. That doesn't make me stubborn, Danny. That makes me consistent. Danny responds, consistency isn't a virtue when you're consistently wrong. The studio is dead silent now. You could hear people breathing. Joy stares at him and says, you really think I'm wrong about everything, don't you? Danny meets her eyes and says, I think you're wrong about this, Joy. I think you're so invested in being the person who says what nobody else will say that you've stopped asking whether you should say it. Joy's voice is steady now, cold almost. She says, I don't need to ask permission to speak my mind, Danny. That's the whole point of what I've been saying. Danny says, and I'm saying that speaking your mind without considering the consequences is just being reckless. Joy responds, and I'm saying that constantly worrying about consequences leads to self-censorship and fear. He takes a step back and says, there's a middle ground, Joy. You can speak your mind and still be responsible. You can be funny and still be kind. They're not mutually exclusive. Joy crosses her arms and says, in theory, sure, but in practice, that middle ground keeps shrinking. Every year there's something new you can't joke about, someone new you can't criticize. Where does it end? Danny spreads his hands and says, it ends when we create a society where everyone feels valued and respected. That's where it ends. Joy shakes her head and says, that's a fantasy, Danny. That's never going to happen because people will always find something to be offended by. It's human nature. Dai's voice rises again and he says, so your solution is to just give up, to just keep hurting people because we can't create a perfect world. Joy yells, my solution is to maintain some sense of reality, to not let the loudest voices dictate what everyone can and can't say. Danny yells back, the loudest voices are people in pain. Joy, maybe we should listen to them. Whoopi finally stands up and says firmly, okay, we need to go to commercial right now. But both Joy and Danny keep going. Joy says, I do listen to them, Danny, I just don't always agree with them. Danny says, disaging is fine, Joy, dismissing isn't. The cameras are pulling back, but you can still hear them. Joy says, I'm not dismissing anyone. Danny says, yes, you are. That's exactly what you've been doing this entire time. The screen fades to black, but their voices echo for just a second longer before cutting off completely. So, there you have it. One of the most intense confrontations in daytime television history. Danny DeVito and Joy Behar going head-to-head over comedy, sensitivity, and where the line should be drawn. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and drop a comment below telling me this. Do you think Joy Behar had a point about comedy going too far in the other direction? Or was Danny DeVito right to call her out? Let me know what you think.